So welcome today. This is building a competitive law application, and this is what we are going to focus on. So we're going to look specifically at how all of the application fits together. So your strategy, your supercurriculars, the LNAT, the personal statement, and the interviews. So these are roughly in the right order, and not just for today, but also in terms of how you should shape your actual preparation. And I'll explain why as we go. But the short answer, and the thing that I really want you to take away from today's session, is that these are not 5 separate tasks. So the same skills underpin absolutely all of them. They are one connected process, and underpinning the skills that they are testing and that you need to demonstrate through them is really the key to building a successful application. So who am I, and really why should you listen to me at all? So I studied law at Oxford and then also in Paris. So I did a dual degree in both English and French law, and I hold undergraduate degrees from both universities. I know what this process is like, and I also know how stressful it is. I've been tutoring law admissions for around about 5 years now. And then 4 years ago, I made the choice to just completely specialise and focus specifically on law admissions, but also more broadly on logical reasoning, critical thinking, and essay writing. So outside of Law Prep Academy, I am a published legal author. I focus specifically on criminal law and technology and the intersection between those two. I also work as a researcher for the Centre for Neurotechnology and Law. I lecture and speak internationally on my research. And I'm not saying that sort of just to impress you, but because the skills that I use every single day are the same skills that I teach, and they are the same skills that universities are really testing for. So when I was looking to build Law Prep Academy, I wanted to build what I didn't have and what, with the benefit of hindsight, I know that law schools are actually looking for. So with that, we are very skills-based. We are specialists. We only do law admissions. We do not look at medical admissions or engineering admissions or any of the others. It's very data-driven. So you'll see I'm someone who likes to know why I am studying what I'm studying and how it all fits into the big picture. We're responsive, so the idea is that you should be able to interact and engage with the curriculum because that's where people learn best. We're expert-led. All of our tutors are experts in their field. We do not hire undergraduates because we believe that the skills that a law degree is teaching really are learnt across the course of the entire degree, and we want specialists to be able to teach you. And I'll talk a little bit about what transparency in particular means later and why it affects you. So, broadly speaking, the way that I look specifically at law admissions is that there are 5 different parts to them. So your strategy, your supercurriculars, the LNAT, which we will spend a decent amount of time on because I know it is the one that a lot of people are concerned about, your personal statement, and the interview. However, if there is one thing and one keyword that I want you to hold in your mind throughout this entire thing, it is this idea of specificity. So throughout all of these things, we need to be showing that you have a specific engagement with the law and a specific reason for wanting to study it. So vague enthusiasm is not going to be particularly useful. What you want to show is this specific developed intellectual engagement with complex ideas. And we'll see what that actually looks like across all 5 sections. So the first part I want to talk about is strategy. And most students skip this entirely and they start by thinking, okay, well, which books do I need to be reading, or when should I sit the LNAT? And whilst those things are important, your strategy is really providing that foundation. And once we have a strong foundation, then we can start to build all of the other aspects of the application on top of that. So strategy is about understanding what skills this process is testing, choosing the right universities for you. So that's beyond just which university is the most prestigious, but also knowing when everything needs to be ready and what your personal timeline looks like. So you have that in place, then we can build everything else off of that. So start with the reality and the numbers, because law is intensely competitive. So Oxford received 2,061 applications in 2024 to 25. They made 247 offers. UCL's acceptance rate is as low as 9%, and law has had the greatest number of applications in the department at Durham. So what I want to get across here is that this is a competitive process. So your strategy is going to be important in distinguishing you from other applicants. So that first question of, well, which university is right for you? Because this really is a strategy question. And I want you to think really about three things for each university that you are considering. So first of all, the teaching style. The paradigmatic example of this is Oxford and Cambridge, who teach through tutorials and supervisions. So those are intensive sessions between you, a tutor, and quite often one other or maybe two other students. They are where you are expected to defend your thinking, to demonstrate that you have understood what you have read that week, and respond to challenges. And just as a preview, that is pretty much exactly what the interview is. So when you think about the interviews, it's really about learning and understanding the teaching style. Now, not every student finds that the best environment to be in. And it is really worth being honest with yourself about whether or not that is something that you are really going to excel at. The second is the course focus. So some universities are much more internationally oriented. Specifically some of the London universities are much more commercially focused and have opportunities for professional development. Some are stronger on public law and human rights. So your interests should really play a role when you come to look at universities. And the third thing, and the thing that I want to focus on more specifically here, is the admissions weighting. So different universities weigh different aspects of those applications in different ways. And that affects how you should prepare and how you should allocate your time. So I'll give you an example here. So Oxford's admission process is actually so much more transparent than most people realise because they publish it all in a report. So this is how it works. So your initial rank is created from three equally weighted components. So those are your contextualised GCSE scores, your Section A score, and your Section B essay on the LNAT. Now, note here, your A levels are the gateway into being considered, but they're not actually taken into account for this first ranking. The Faculty Selection Committee then reviews individual cases for mitigating circumstances, specific contextual factors, and exceptional LNAT performance. So that means that if your LNAT performance was exceptional, but your GCSE scores perhaps were not as good, then you can actually have a much better chance of being reconsidered. So for a student who, for example, if you're looking at Oxford, but maybe your GCSE scores you didn't quite score as well as you thought you would, then you really want to be weighting your preparation towards the LNAT and making sure that you can make up for those sections and for how your application will be weighted. So yeah, the critical thing really to understand is that Oxford uses GCSEs, Section A and Section B. Contrast that with, say, the University of Bristol, where they weight 20% GCSEs, 40% A-level, 40% of the LNAT. Note, they actually only really, they say we may refer, means that they don't under all circumstances. So they may refer to the personal statement and reference to differentiate between applicants. So your personal statement for the University of Bristol, at least, is not always a central component. Also worth noting that for the LNAT, they say that they weight it 60% towards Section A and then 40% towards Section B. So what really the important thing here to note is that not all universities use these application components in the same way. Part of your strategy should be going and researching or talking through with a tutor how the universities that you're targeting are actually going to use the components of your application and whether or not that changes how you should be preparing. The final aspect of the strategy that I'm going to talk about today is this idea of timelines, right? So for Oxford and Cambridge, if you were looking at either of these universities, your LNAT deadline is the 15th of October, as is your UCAS deadline. Interviews will be kind of late November, early December, and decisions come out in January. For other LNAT universities and other universities more generally, you have King's, UCL, and LSE usually have a separate deadline, and then UCAS has its own deadline as well. Now, this is a very simplified version. There is a resource at the end that I'm going to give you on my Substack, which is a free guide, and that has the timeline in significantly more detail, but these are sort of the key things to keep in mind. So the second thing we're going to look at is supercurriculars. I'm sure a lot of you are quite familiar with what the difference is, but extracurriculars are activities outside of your academics, so sports, music, your D of E, whereas supercurriculars are examples of academic enrichment beyond your school syllabus. So for law applications, your supercurriculars matter far, far more than your extracurriculars. And that's not because playing sport or anything like that is worthless. It is because whether or not you have played hockey does not tell a law admissions tutor anything about how you are going to react to difficult questions about contract law. So some of the best supercurriculars are very, very easy to do, just something like reading. They don't have to cost a lot of money, but do be careful that you are prioritizing your supercurriculars over your extracurriculars. So how to use them effectively? Because one of the things, and I did the same when I was preparing, one of the things I see students do a lot is they will go online and they will search best books for law students or best books for prospective law students. And quite often you get the same books, the sort of Rule of Law by Lord Bingham, Letters to a Law Student, etc., etc. Now, going back to right at the beginning, what I said about specificity, and if we think about this as a numbers game, you want your application to stand out. So you need non-general reading and books and supercurriculars. So the first thing I would say is start broad. Follow what interests you specifically. Look for interesting stories in the news, in different things that you come across, be that in podcasts or even in subjects at school. Just make sure that you are taking it beyond the curriculum. And then ask why. So not just kind of, I find criminal law interesting, but okay, well, why do you find it interesting? So I asked that to one of the students that I was working with, and she was talking about it being interesting because it's the only area in which the state holds an individual accountable. Okay, well, we go one step further. Well, why is that interesting? And she said, because that's about how state power is exercised, and that's why law interests me, because I'm interested in those issues about state power and how we can constrain it. So that's a really then specific and unique view on why do you want to study law? And what it meant is that we were able to then kind of tailor her supercurricular interests to that specific question. And so then it's this idea of following the thread. Let that initial question or interest lead somewhere. So one thing should open the next. Say you read a case and it refers you to a speech of a justice. That speech leads to an academic debate. That debate leads to a podcast. That chain of thinking is how you show in your personal statement that you have a genuine intellectual engagement with the law, as opposed to just listing things, ticking them off, saying I've got a case, I've got an article, I've got a book, and being happy and done with it. So, like I said, the best activities that work, and the ones that are quite often mentioned on university pages, are almost entirely free. So reading, podcasts, essay competitions, I would say those are quite seriously underused. You do not have to win, but what it does demonstrate is that you are able to research independently and make your own argument. Funnily enough, one of the only questions that I was asked in my interview was a question on one of the only questions I was asked about my personal statement was about an essay competition that I had entered and my reasoning behind one of the questions. Notably, in many of my kind of stronger students' profiles this year, they had personal projects. So whether that had been an EPQ, whether that had been them sitting with a teacher or a tutor and then coming up with their own independent work, So they'd come up with a question. I believe one of them had done something on artificial intelligence and intellectual property and just conducted their own research. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to seem on its surface very prestigious, but just make sure you have that evidence of individual legal thinking. Visiting a local court, entirely free. It can be a very, very interesting experience. A note on work experience, a lot of people are worried about it. Law schools are very much aware that it is not, there's not equal opportunity to get work experience. You do not need it. And if you can get it, great, because you can see how law works in practice, but you are not going to have your application looked down on because you don't have it. So, like I've said, it matters far more about how you use the supercurriculars to demonstrate engagement in law than how superficially prestigious they are. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's take a look at this example here. So if we look at student 1, I read the case of Carlisle and Carbolic Smoke Co., which established the concept of unilateral contracts and demonstrated how courts interpret offers and acceptance. This deepened my interest in contract law. So what's wrong with this? First thing is, it names a case, but then it really just tells us what the case is about, and it tells us nothing about how the student thinks. 1, the law tutors will know this case, and they will likely know it far better than you do. So just telling them more about what they already know is really a waste of characters in your personal statement and tells them nothing about your own engagement in the law. The other thing is, deepened my interest is a phrase that I see a lot in first and second drafts. Please do not use it. Be specific. How did it deepen your interest? What do you mean by deepened your interest in the first place? So contrast this with someone who's read the same case and writes something along the lines of this. So reading Carlisle demonstrated the importance of precision of language. Whether a statement is an offer or an invitation to treat can turn on the specific wording of the contract, but I found it interesting how context is also considered. So we just pause there for a minute. Notice already that their invocation of the case is far more specific. So they've demonstrated something that they personally have taken away. They've demonstrated that they've read the case in depth, because they're not just saying, well, here was the outcome, but they're saying, actually, this specific part of the outcome was really interesting to me. And then let's look at the rest of it, because it has this really nice chain of reasoning. I then read Lord Hoffman's speech on contractual interpretation and realised that this pattern repeats itself in statutory interpretation. I want to study law to understand how courts navigate this tension and what happens when it produces unjust results. Now, is this perfect? No. It can probably be a little bit more concise at points, but this is based off of a personal statement that was submitted by a student of mine this year who currently has an offer to read law at Cambridge. So you see the difference between this and this. Be specific, be individual. It is absolutely rewarded. The LNAT. So we're going to spend a pretty significant chunk of time here because I think it is the most opaque most opaque component. And I also think it's the one where I see the most misinformation. So this is directly from the LNAT Consortium website. And you'll notice here that it talks about the verbal reasoning skills at the heart of legal education. So just have a look at those very quickly, because the list might sound abstract, but really what it is describing is just the ability to read an argument carefully, understand what's being claimed, the evidence offered, but also what's being assumed. The other interesting thing to note is that this does not distinguish between section A and section B. So how I would encourage you to think about these two sections, so the multiple choice and the essay, is thinking about these as a mirror of each other. So if section A is testing your ability to apply all of these skills to analyse someone else's argument, well then section B is testing your ability to use your logical reasoning skills and your verbal reasoning skills to create and structure your own argument. So I would really encourage you not to think about these as two separate parts of the test, but to think about them as a mirror to each other. So understanding what it looks like, 2 hours 15, results in early February. So note, if you are applying to Oxbridge, you will not know what your LNAT result is before you get potentially an offer. As I said, 2 sections, you have the multiple choice and you have the essay. So it is a test, like I said, of verbal reasoning, deductive and inductive skills, information, and the ability to distinguish between different types of writing. But it's absolutely not a test of the law. And I want to make that really clear. When you learn for A-levels, you learn for content. So you are being taught on, you've learned all of this content in class. Well, now let's see how you apply that in an essay or a practice scenario. Here, there is no content. So we're looking at something that's more skills-based. The analogy that I often use with my students is think about the LNAT more like learning to drive a car than it is learning for your A-levels. So it is about learning specific skills, practicing them and refining them, and then demonstrating that you have those skills in a situation that you have you don't really have too many past papers for, and you have to demonstrate that you can do it in the moment under pressure. So that more is what the LNAT is about. So if you think about section A, the national average sits around 20 to 21 each year. So 20 to 21 out of 42. The average for students offered places at Oxford and Cambridge usually hovers around 29 to 31. So what that should tell you is this is not a test in which you are expected to get every single question right. It is a very, very difficult test. But note, there are no deductions for incorrect answers. So as you are going through, please, please, please try not to leave any blanks, because there are only 4 answer choices. You have about a 25% chance of guessing the right answer, higher if you eliminate some of the incorrect answer choices first. And please note that you cannot go back to section A after you move on to the essay. So take all of the 95 minutes that you have. Best practices, because I am not going to be able to go through everything about section A in one webinar, but here are some common mistakes that I quite often see. Again, be specific and nitpick at everything. It's a bit cheesy, but I often say that every single answer is guilty until proven innocent. So be really specific, nitpick. Quite often, the difference between, say, answer choice A and answer choice C is one word. And it is your job to figure out what the significance of that one word is and to try and reason, okay, well, which one is the correct answer? The second is to be wary of absolutes. So something like all, none, never, always. Most academics are generally very wary of using absolutes, because if I were to say to you, all students who sit the LNAT are unprepared, well, then all you need to do is bring one student who is prepared for the LNAT, and it destroys my entire argument. Whereas if I say that most or many students who sit the LNAT are unprepared, then you bringing one person along doesn't destroy my argument at all. So again, that's one of the reasons why academics are very wary. And if you see them in an answer choice, it should be a pretty immediate red flag. Try and read actively rather than passively. Now, this is a skill that can absolutely be developed, but engage with the texts. When you're reading, see if you can figure out before you get to the end, well, what is this person trying to convince me of? Keep a log of your mistakes, and I would tag them by question type. A very easy way to do this is to have some sort of Excel spreadsheet, but check, see if you are continuously getting inference-based questions wrong, and then structure your practice accordingly. So if you're really stuck on a question, eliminate what you can, move on, make an educated guess, but do not let one passage derail your entire section. The questions at the beginning of the passage are worth exactly the same amount of marks as the questions at the end. So please do not spend too long at the beginning and miss some of the potentially easier marks at the end. Now, this is specifically for international students, But I also think that domestic students, I think it's something good to be aware of. There is a very good app called Vocabulary. It is completely free on the App Store, and it will just give you quite an interesting word every single day. A lot of the questions on section A are based around context and also around words that can have multiple meanings. You will get texts from everything from around about the 1500s to present day. So if you were anything like me and you dropped English after GCSE, may well be worth having a quick look over some of your kind of Victorian literature, just to remind yourself of how these texts are written and their specific register. The other thing that I would say, and this isn't necessarily older English prose, but I would read the conversation and the links just there. What that is it is a news site, but it's written by academics. So they are blog posts, but they're written in exactly the same type of register as a lot of the texts on the LNAT are written in. So I would encourage you to have a look at that. In terms of political passages, you will get politics passages. If there are specific words or specific aspects that you do not understand, something like devolution, might be worth having a look at the UK Politics Wikipedia. It is generally quite good structurally, you just need to skim it, because some of them will involve quite technical political terms. The other thing you can do is just have a look at the UK government website. Some of their blogs can be quite useful to see that kind of writing in action. Moving on now to section B, 40 minutes, you have a maximum of 750 words. However, please, please, please try and keep it between 500 to 600, maybe 650. The most successful applicants I see, and you'll see why in a minute, are generally writing in that range. Now, different universities will mark it and use it differently. There are some core skills to be learnt. The main thing here, once again, is that it's very different to your A-level exams. In your A-levels, you are writing essays to prove that you know the content. Here, there is no content. And so the question is, well, what are they testing? They're testing your ability to reason. And that comes through in structure, that comes through in your language and your presentation rather than the content. Quite a lot of the questions are very philosophical. They're things like, does free will exist? No one is expecting you to solve that in 40 minutes in 500 words. So you don't need to construct a kind of perfect answer that answers every single possible aspect of it, but you do need to construct a very clear, very well-reasoned argument and defend it well. So some more examples. Oxford publishes its mark scheme. Again, I'm not going to be able to go through it in intense detail, but I would encourage you to go and read it very closely. You'll see here, they have the high scoring versus the low scoring. They're looking, again, for specificity, close attention to the questions, sustained and focused treatment of the issues. Got this idea of well-drawn distinctions and an eye for relevance. So one mistake a lot of people make is answering the question that they wish they'd had, as opposed to the question that is in front of them. Make sure that you do not do that. Awareness of more than one possible line of argument, and then this idea of independent critical judgment. Clear and fluent writing, notable clarity, appropriateness of structure and argument. Again, looking at reasoning ability, they're looking at structure, they are not looking at content. And they mark it, interestingly, in the same way as they mark our finals. So 70 and above at finals level, that usually consists of a first. Very, very few people get above 70. The average admission to Oxford hovers around about a 65. But what you will see here, quite interestingly, is that they assign these levels as to really how likely you are to get a place. So it should show you about how influential this section B can be. So the mark scheme is also not looking for perfection, right? If you look at that 65 to 69, you're looking for a preponderance of those high mark features from the previous slide, with only a limited number of low mark features. Again, skills, not knowledge. An interesting thing is when you then look at something like UCL's mark scheme, we see the same skills shown all over again. So we have application to different tasks, engage with this intense work. Again, reasoning ability, analyze, solve problem, logical, critical approaches. That's the language of logical reasoning. We've got this idea of distinctions, separating the relevant from the irrelevant. Are you really focusing on the question? We're looking at accurate and critical observations. And then also we're looking at communication. So what's really interesting is this last comment that they leave. They're looking to detect a future potential as a law student. So they're looking at kind of everything in general. Sometimes they interview, but really it's the LNAT, which is relied upon mainly as this evidence of future potential. And then they also have a mark scheme. They give it a numerical mark between 1 and 5. But again, look at the similarity, right? It's those core reasoning and logical reasoning skills that they are testing for. Now, one thing I want to address something pretty directly is the common misconception that you cannot revise for the LNAT. Well, I would say, look at what the LNAT consortium says. Right? It's designed to be a test of aptitude rather than educational achievement. The skills that they need to do well in the LNAT are also the skills that they need to do well in legal education. Now, I think that can be misconstrued. I see a lot of people, including what to me, I find this Reddit comment rather entertaining, which take it to mean that coaching is a scam and it's something that you should just practice on your own. Now, I think there are some valid points in this, and I think it is something that is worth addressing. But they're not entirely wrong. So going back to that driving test analogy, if you are learning to drive on your own, you absolutely can do it. There is nothing that says you need to have a driving instructor. You probably could teach yourself to drive on private land if you had a lot of time and sufficient motivation to do so. Some people do, but you would be slower, you would be likely to develop bad habits, and you would also have no idea what the examiner is actually looking for when you then come to sit the test. So those skills, when you're then asked to do them under pressure, are not going to be as well honed as they would be otherwise. Where I do think that this has some merit is that a lot of places will not teach this as skills-based. So a lot of places do teach it as some sort of hack, or there is something that they can teach you in a couple of lessons rather than this sustained focus. And I do think, just as a side note, please do be wary of that. So I would watch out for tutors that are still undergraduates, right? A law degree is specifically designed to teach you the skills that the LNAT tests. Studying law in and of itself does not qualify you to teach them. And also, if you look back at those mark schemes in section B, the criteria look simple on the surface, but understanding how they work and understanding how to then go on and apply them requires a lot more than it appears initially. And if your tutor can't really explain those with precision, then I would generally be careful. So what helps is building the skills properly, right? Understand what the sections are rewarding and get feedback from people, be that from a tutor, be that from a teacher. I've just put on here, I think one of my favourite pieces of feedback that I have ever received, which is about how sort of the type of teaching that we offer takes people further than just the exam. And so whatever you choose to do and however you choose to prepare for the LNAT and law admissions more generally, please, please, please do it with this skills-based focus in mind. So moving on to the personal statement. First thing, why do you want to study this course or subject? How have your qualifications and studied helped you to prepare to study this course or subject? And what else have you done to prepare outside of education? And why are these experiences useful? So previously, it used to be one long statement. Now we have these 3 questions, which is the new UCAS structure. 2 things to note. Law is not primarily a vocational degree. You are not writing your personal statement to convince someone that you would be a good lawyer. You are, as that UCL marking guidance suggested, you're convincing them that you would be a good law student. So I also think, and I've bolded them in the questions, look at how active the language in this is. Have you actually prepared? Preparation is very active as a verb. And this idea of utility, not just listing, but why is what you have done actually useful to being a law student in the future? The other thing I've put on here is to look at university-specific requirements. So, for example, LSE has a requirement, or they ask that your answer to question 3 not be more than 800 characters. Now, that's buried pretty deep in the fine print of their website, but I would encourage you to look at your target universities and double check that they don't have, or they haven't updated for this year, any extra requirements. Before you start writing, I would encourage you to think about what tutors are looking for. So they're looking for, can this person engage with ideas at university level? Would they contribute meaningfully to our academic community? And do they show the qualities that we see in students who thrive here? Now, these are questions that I have synthesized from conversations with tutors at universities, but also other academic tutors. Notice what those questions are not asking. They are not asking how many books you've read or how impressive your list of supercurriculars are. They are asking something different to, say, a CV. What they're asking for is they are asking for that evidence of intellectual engagement. So you need to be writing your personal statement with that in mind. This is one of the exercises that I recommend all my students do before they start writing. So go to your target university's course page. This here is from the Durham website. And I would encourage you to read how they themselves describe their law degree. Look at what kind of teaching they offer, but also then turn that around and say, well, what kind of student are they looking for who is going to succeed in that environment? So if we look at this Durham example, you can see the emphasis on small group teaching in this small group format, very much self-directed learning and independent research. Well, okay, so your next task is to sit down and figure out, well, which qualities are they looking for in students that are able to go and do that? So they're going to be looking for someone who is kind of self-motivated, who has a good eye for detail, who is able to, really work and contribute to those small groups. Then, after you've got that list, right next to it, after that old adage kind of show, don't tell, how do your own experiences map onto those? So how can you demonstrate that you are someone with a keen attention to detail based on what you've read or the supercurriculars that you have done? And you can go deeper than the course page. So you can look at the faculty blogs, you can look at LinkedIn, you can look at publications, but the more specifically that you understand what the law schools are looking for, really the more you can make your statement more compelling. Now, common mistakes I see with the personal statement. This new personal statement structure, I think, is both a gift because it's going to make things significantly more easier in terms of just how you start your structure. But I also think it's a trap because those questions are very specifically worded. And if you go outside of, say, in those questions 2 and 3, if you go outside of your preparation and back into why do you want to study law, these tutors are lawyers and they are going to notice that you are not answering the question. So you have clear prompts, but it's also even clearer now when students have not understood what the personal statement is asking for. The next thing is this idea of writing chronologically. So in year 10, I did X, Y, Z. In year 11, I did etc., etc. They don't need a timeline of some form of legal awakening, organized by theme, right? Organized by your thread and how you have built your interest. Again, name dropping as opposed to showing engagement. So just name dropping a lot of really complex texts and cases is not going to be particularly useful. If you say, I've read Letters to a Law Student and I found it interesting, great, so have a lot of other people. Write the personal statement that only you can write. And the final thing is not leaving enough time to edit, because writing concisely and precisely is a skill that is still being addressed in this specific format. So your first draft is really just your raw material. Most students I work with end up with anywhere between 7 and 15 drafts before they are looking at submitting. So start early and allow yourself time to edit. So then how do you approach it like a strong applicant? Research. What kind of student are they describing? What kind of qualities do they value? Map your own profile and what do you have that specifically aligns with what they're asking for? And if you're here, well, then you're early enough to go and look and think, what am I missing? And how can I use the time that I have left to develop those skills so that when it comes to submitting your personal statement, either in October or later, you are really able to demonstrate that you are the perfect law student for them specifically. Start early, get as much feedback as you can. So write far more than you need to begin with. It is much easier to cut ideas out than build it up, but you will need to be judicious with what you put in there. So it might not be the case that absolutely everything you have read goes in. It is better to have 3 or 4 really well-developed examples demonstrating that development in thought than it is to have kind of 15 or 16 books name dropped. Right, so the interviews. Oxford and Cambridge only, really at undergraduate level. Other universities may interview, but it is exceedingly rare. So to start your preparation, start by thinking, well, why are they interviewing? Oxford and Cambridge obviously teach through these tutorials or supervisions. So these intensive sessions where you have to defend your thinking. As I said earlier, the interview is just really a preview of this format. And it kind of has 2 purposes. And the first is to back up what you've stated on your personal statement. And the other is to test how you respond when you are presented with something new. So how to prepare? Well, really get comfortable reading statutes you've never seen and get comfortable challenging your thinking in response to new information and thinking about how your answer might change if a specific fact were slightly different. What are they looking for? They're looking for you to take a position, and then they're also looking for you to defend it. So please do not sit on the fence. They're looking for you to follow a line of reasoning, and they will challenge you. You've got to bear in mind that these are people who have been researching the law for quite a lot of them, quite literally decades. They know far more than you do. You're not going to get everything right, and that's okay. I don't know anyone who got into Oxford who got everything right in their interview. But what they're more interested in is how you respond when you get things wrong. They're looking for that intellectual curiosity, that interest in the ideas themselves, not just in whether or not you've got a question correct or incorrect. They're looking for that comfort with not knowing, that idea of being able to think out loud, show them how your mind works when you are faced with something difficult. And then again, specificity and precision throughout. Being vague is not going to help you here. So just a quick example, because I'm aware that a lot of that probably seems quite abstract. This is Section 3 of the Sexual Offences Act 2003. And just read through it very quickly. So we've got this idea of a person, A, commits an offence if he intentionally touches another person, B, the touching is sexual, B does not consent to the touching, and A does not reasonably believe that B consents. We'll focus, and obviously we've got the second part about whether it's reasonable and the steps that A has taken. So when we break that down, it might initially seem simple, but well, what questions does that immediately raise, right? We've got this idea of intention. That could be interesting. What about touching? Does touching include touching someone's hair? Does it have to be skin on skin? What if I were to throw a bucket of water over someone? Is that touching for the purposes of this statute? What about sexual? Is it objectively sexual, as in from the perspective of the reasonable observer, or is it just that it's perceived as sexual by the potential victim? Again, this idea of consent, this idea of reasonable belief, whatever you may take that to mean. What sort of steps should A have had to have taken? All of these questions are things that they could potentially ask you about, and being able to notice and think about the way that statutes are drafted, every single word has a purpose. Being able to really dig into that is what they're going to be looking for in the interviews. So you don't need to know all of the answers, they're not expecting you to, but have a think about different perspectives and reason through them. Look to demonstrate legal thinking. So we offer quite a bit for free. As of next week, we are starting up our YouTube channel. So there are 2 official practice tests. Unfortunately, there are only 2. They also have quite opaque answers. You get the actual answer choices as opposed to the reasoning. So we're going to be uploading kind of full walkthroughs of those practice tests. If you're interested on where to start with the supercurricular reading, we do have a free book club on Substack. It's just law prep notes on Substack. And each month we start with a theme. This month's theme is justice. So we are looking at how do you define justice? We are looking at whether or not an unjust law is really still law, and whether or not justice is just about the outcome or if it's about the result. I'll come back to the trial in a minute. We also do free Q&As, or we will be doing free Q&As on our YouTube. So if you do have any questions after this, then feel free to submit them for that. The platform, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, we are offering a free trial of that with a practice test that you can sign up for. And also, again, I'll talk about in a minute, the 15-minute consultations. In terms of our paid offerings, when I was building this, it was very much with that skills-based in mind, and it was thinking, well, what did I need when I was practicing that I just didn't have? So think of it as a virtual textbook. So most textbooks give you quite static information. You read it, you highlight it, you work through it. But it can't tell you where you're going wrong or adapt your progress, and you can't ask it questions. So that is why we chose to put everything of ours online. So we have 4 tiers, but all of them offer access to our video and written lessons, set amounts of practice tests. Then we also have annotated personal statements, section B answers, and interview scenarios. As I said right at the beginning, I'm someone that's very data-driven. So it creates that mistake log, like I was talking about, so you can go back and review every single mistake, and you can also see how you've progressed across the different question types. Feedback on practice essays on certain tiers from our expert tutors. Coming back to that idea of transparency, we don't hire undergraduates. We have a minimum 3 years experience. We have enhanced DBS. You would be surprised how many places don't. And we have fair pay. You might wonder why that impacts you. Well, many of the top consultancy firms will charge you, say, £100 an hour, and will pay their tutors £25. And I think that undersells the tutors. And I also think it's unfair to you because you're getting a quarter of the effort and the experience because the better tutors go elsewhere. And like I said, it's all about the ability to ask questions and to get expert and specialist answers. Across some of the higher platforms, we have 3 live lessons per week with a tutor on Teams. So we have the option to have camera and video on, but it's very interactive. You will ask questions in real time and you work through those examples in real time as well. And then we also have one-to-one tutoring. It is included, you have 2 hours of tutoring a week in the bespoke prep package, and that includes personal tracking, messaging, weekly targets. And then we also offer it as one-off sessions booked separately. One of the things that we are running this year is our summer school. So that is from the 3rd to the 7th of August this year. There are 2 specialist tracks. One is law and technology, which is taught by me. The other is criminology and human rights, which is taught by Lauren Fox, who is a current DPhil at the University of Oxford and also teaches on the undergraduate law course there. It's very specialist. We run 20 hours of live interactive teaching groups where you are expected to contribute. Included in those are 2 Oxbridge-style tutorials. So again, that's really great for your interview preparation. A full mock trial experience, and also included in that are the 4 hours of admissions masterclasses. Going back to that personal project, when Lauren and I sat down to design this, we wanted to create something where you could get the most effective preparation possible. So we included that personal project element, which is done across the summer afterwards. And then we have a prize for the best submission. So that is everything from me. That is my email up there. If you do have more questions, feel free to send them across. I will be taking some questions now. One thing I do want to make clear is that I won't be answering any questions based on anyone's specific situations at the minute. If you do want to talk through your specific situation, so where you are in your preparation, what you're finding hard, any kind of more specific personal questions, if you go onto our website, which is just www.lawprepacademy.co.uk, then you should be able to book a free consultation on there.